Hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of The Infirmary. Today, I am super stoked to have Brad Culp, who just wrote and published The Norwegian Method, the culture, science, and humans behind the groundbreaking approach to elite endurance performance. Brad is a writer, journalist, and endurance athlete who's been working in the triathlon space for as long as I can remember. He started publishing articles in Triathlete magazine since I started reading it back in the early aughts. He won 3 state titles in high school water polo and earned All-American honors in swimming as part of a relay team. He finished his first Ironman triathlon during his junior year of college when he was the youngest athlete competing at Ironman Wisconsin at age 19. He also founded the high-performing Miami University Triathlon Club and continues to compete at a high level in endurance sports. Culp is a contributor to the Red Bull Red Bulletin, Men's Journal, 220 Triathlon, Triathlon Lumina, Triathlon Plus, and Slow Twitch. He lives in Geneva, Illinois, with his wife and 2 children. Brad, welcome to the Infirmary.
Well, thank you so much, Chris, for that lovely intro. That's probably better than I could have done myself.
All right. Thank you. Thanks. I hope you're not sick. We call this place the Infirmary because, I think one of the things I really love about reading your stuff and your posts and everything you put out into the world, you do have a slightly tongue-in-cheek kind of tone of voice to everything you do. I get the sense that you take triathlon seriously, but you don't, hold on to it so tightly that you kill it. The reason that I started this show is because I really think that there's a lot of misconceptions out there in the endurance and triathlon worlds, and that those misconceptions usually end up with athletes getting hurt or injured or sick or burnt out, and I think that kind of sucks. And first, I just want to hear, how did you end up on this kind of island of misfit toys that we call triathlon?
Definitely was just looking for an outlet from swimming, around midway through college. And I had some friends who had dabbled in triathlon and who I was very competitive with. So I was like, I should give it a try. And about the same time I was doing that, I like so many people, watched the NBC broadcast of Kona. It was like 2003 or 4. It was just, not to say the broadcast isn't amazing now, but it was really in its peak back then, and just really they had Paul Sherwin on it back then. It was just awesome. I just pulled in. I was like, I have to do this, to do Ironman. Just signed up for my first Ironman kind of while I was still swim training, and didn't really focus too hard on it. But from the time I did that first one at age 19, I was hooked. And most of my 20s was spent doing a lot of Ironman racing, probably too much, and probably spent more of my 30s recovering from that and trying to rebuild. But yes, still stuck very much in the endurance world. I don't do a ton of tries anymore. My focus, at least in the short term, is now swim run. Kind of found something that is a little more easier with 2 small children if you remove bike training. Just sort of love dabbling in endurance in try, and don't plan on leaving anytime soon, unfortunately.
Were you one of those guys who your first triathlon was an Ironman?
No, it wasn't it was I think it was my second or third. I did a sprint and then immediately signed up, and there might have been an Olympic in between. I can't totally remember, but no, I have tons of friends who did, even buddies in college. I did my first Ironman. I told it about them. The next year they signed up for Ironman Wisconsin, knowing nothing about triathlon. And a couple of those guys, they just wanted to do the one, tick it off, and that was it. Didn't catch the bug. But yeah, some of them caught it and have stuck with it.
Nice. Wow, what a Pied Piper thing to do. Get a bunch of juniors and seniors in college to just sign up and do an Ironman.
Right. And like I'm going to do swim run Catalina now with my college roommate who he was the captain of the sailing team when we started being
Mhm.
friends and had no endurance background. And now he's doing Ironman and doing swim run and ultra marathons. And yeah, so I love preaching the gospel of endurance and trying to get people hooked. That's definitely something that's been a constant.
Clearly, you wrote a book about about this sport that I think will get people stoked and even probably more hooked. Okay, softball question to start. Every time we work on a new project or a book or whatever, we tend to learn some new words. This was the first time I had ever bumped into the word tryptanophobic.
Oh yeah.
Was that the case for you, or have you been afraid of needles for most of your life?
The entire life. Yeah, and I actually know what it goes back to, and the same reason I'm afraid of the dentist
Hmm.
to this day. And yeah, I had a lot of teeth problems when I was a kid, so I was always in the dentist, and they were my baby teeth wouldn't fall out, and I was like, I was it was almost like I was seventh or eighth grade, like getting ready for high school, and I needed braces, so they're like, we have to pull a bunch of teeth out. So I had like a couple different visits where they were pulling some teeth and numbing, with a ton of Novocaine. And I remember once they slipped and they jammed it into the palate of my mouth, a needle, like a big one, just straight up there, and it was
Oh my
just
God.
like almost made me go white and black out, like just pass out. And yeah, from that I was 13, maybe 14 years old, and that stuck with me forever. And I hate needles. I hate getting blood work. Yeah, I don't enjoy blood.
Hmm.
I might have gotten that from my dad. I know that he's really squeamish about blood. But yeah, the blood stuff is tough. So the lactate stuff is tough for me. But yeah, it was cool learning that it's one of the more common phobias in the world, and a lot of people deal with it. And yeah, I'm not that weird for having it, I guess.
What a hilarious, this is always the thing that happens to writers is like the thing that you are most terrified of ends up being like part of the subject of the thing that you're working on.
Right. And yeah, once I got, like, I'd never played with lactate testing before starting this project. And yeah, as soon as I started researching and stuff and realizing, that obviously, as we'll get to, the Norwegian method is a lot more, but lactate is a pretty important component and something that I needed to learn about to write about. So yeah, I will say if you're afraid of needles, it is one of the less invasive ways to draw blood. If you've had a tetanus test, it's very very similar. It's very very tiny needles, so at least that's good.
Nice. Um, well, first of all, I just want to hear the story of how you got to tell this story, of how you came to, you know, make this book happen. I mean,
Sure.
Gustav and Kristen and Alexander and Olaf are like have really been a big part of the triathlon world in the last decade, and I would love to know how you pulled this off.
Yeah, I like so many who follow triathlon, I've been very, very glued into what that small group of Norwegians has been doing for about the last 10 years. And yeah, I'd written a little bit about each of them and got the opportunity via Red Bull. They had sponsored Christian for basically his entire career and had never produced a feature on him. And after he had had that amazing run of winning Tokyo and then winning the Ironman Championship that was in St. George, they reached out and they're like, "We need a feature story on him that can kind of live forever on our website, and we can use for marketing." So yeah, I explained to him, I'm like, he basically lives in Spain. We'll probably have to do it in Spain. And I was excited about that. I was like, I want a trip to, go work out in Spain for a while, and I'll probably make it an extended trip. And they're like, no, we have to do it in Norway. That's where he's from. And I tried explaining, I'm just like, he really, really does not spend much time. Like he's a Norwegian who's never in Norway. But the editor there, Peter Flax, who's brilliant, thought that was really important, as did, the rest of the guys there. And I'm glad that we did. It was cool to spend some time with Christian in Bergen, where he hadn't spent much time, for much of his triathlon career. Although that's as he's made this shift in the last year or so, that's kind of changing. But yeah, it was cool to see where he spends his time when he's there, and sort of the group of up and coming Norwegian triathletes that really he had fostered, and the group that he had helped build, in this amazing training culture, and just seeing them all together at the pool or out running, just to get a little insight into what that culture is like. And of course, seeing him and Gustav together, who have been so key to each other's career, and this little microculture that the two of them and Olaf have built. So yeah, the focus while I was in Bergen was just Kristian, and getting to know him and his story, and what makes him such a psychopath, and chase such crazy dreams. And then it had done that, and a couple months later, a publisher had reached out, to see if I thought there might be a whole book, to it. And we had some conversation back and forth, and at first I wasn't so sure, because the Norwegian Method had been written about quite a lot, and it's specifically the stuff that most people are familiar with, the double threshold, the lactate testing, those sort of hype components. And the more I thought about it, and the more I thought back to my time in Bergen, and the cultural aspects, I was like, no, I think there is something really unique there. And especially the more I talked to Olaf and Arild, who've been Kristian and Gustav's two coaches, they really convinced me that there's a lot more, and there was definitely enough to build out a book. And yeah, once I started writing, I actually realized that there was more that I hope that I get a chance to do a second edition, because there's stuff that I feel like I left out. There's even more to the method that I think I was able to get in there. So yeah, it was sort of evolved organically from a trip out there to do a story on Kristian, and yeah, it turned into a book on the whole sports culture over there, and I'm glad it did. Certainly didn't see it coming initially, but yeah, it's funny how that works out.
Is this your first full book?
Yeah.
Nice.
Yep.
Congrats.
Thanks. Yeah, I had thrown around a few ideas with publishers the last couple of years, and nothing that really turned both of us on. And this is sort of the right timing too. I think that the Norwegian Method is really been in the news, and especially with Kristian and Jakob and Gustav performing so well, I think the timing was good. And I'm glad we launched it right before Kona. It would have been really cool if one of those guys could have pulled out a win. But yeah, I'm excited to see where their careers go in the next couple of years.
And what was the kind of time frame that the reporting and the writing unfolded over? I think a lot of people don't really get a sense of like how long these projects take. And so like start to finish, like how long were you working on this project?
It's surprisingly quick for a book, and that was only because my publisher had reached a distribution agreement with Simon & Schuster. So we had the opportunity to get a lot more distribution, as long as we could put it out before October 15th is like the deadline for the Christmas push, basically the holiday push. So we started, I think, got everything signed like around the Christmas before, and then so I really started work January 1st of last year,
goodness.
Working on it, and then I was probably had half the manuscript submitted April 1st, and then worked through the summer, especially with the Olympics being a component. The rest of it we finished basically right after the Olympics. It was like an 8-month window, which definitely tighter than I would have liked, especially for my first book. But I was so excited to have the opportunity to reach a larger audience, and honestly, if you don't have that, as from being a content creator and working on deadlines, if you don't have a really tight deadline, it can kind of be a blessing sometimes and force you to get out some good work. I'm glad the timing worked when it did, and it was fun trying to like cram in the last stuff as the Olympics were happening, which was really exciting, especially for Ingebrigtsen, and him being such a big character of the Paris Olympics. I think that it was a cool year to work on this project for sure.
Yeah, that must have been you had a very intense 2024.
Yeah, it was. Certainly, I needed a big writing break after that, which was nice, and now I'm eager again to get started on some other projects.
Nice. as I was reading the first few chapters, like this book is a little bit of an anomaly for like a endurance triathlon book, because I love that you were like, "Yep, we're going to talk about triathlon first. We're going to talk about boats,"
Yep.
and, and it took a little while for the penny to drop, and then I was like, "Oh, okay. Each of these chapters is like a science, human, or culture chapter." And then, first, like you do the reading thing where you're like, oh, does it repeat in that pattern? And then you're like, nope. He's sort of jumping between those three topics. How did you come up with that organizing principle?
That was I'll give most of the credit to my publisher Renee, who was brilliant. And so originally I had the three topics: culture, science, and humans, and had it broken up into all the culture, all the science, all the humans. And the culture and science part might have worked like that, but it was weird just trying to put in the humans who the chronologically then didn't fit, and weren't so intertwined. So we just sort of broke those three components apart, and she really rebuilt them almost chronologically, but just in the way that told the story of the method as smoothly as we could. And yeah, at first when she told me she was going to do that, I was just like, I'm like, this is like, we're done. Like, how are we going to do this? And I was so glad it worked out the way it did. Yeah, I think that the flow was really nice in that way. And, I was so worried that people were going to be kind of turned off from the first two chapters, which, really, really don't get into any much sports science. But that seems to be what really pulled people in, and they seem to enjoy the most. And I'm just a big history nerd. I love Viking history is just something I geek out on. So I probably could have gotten the book done a month faster if I didn't spend all of January just like reading every single book about Viking history. And yeah, I probably could have gone even more overboard on that.
Nice. Yeah, your love of history really comes through, and I think I would agree that was part of the thing that really like pulled me in, because I was like, oh wow, this is not just a book about sport, because at a certain point in your life, you're sort of like, okay, yes, this is the sport that I've kind of built my life around, but I want more. And the contextualizing of all of like the Viking history and the shipbuilding history, I thought was really like sort of a masterstroke. It really it like elevates the book from just a book about training to something more. And I was like, oh, that was like a really interesting choice. So kudos to either
Thanks.
you or your publisher or both.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate it. I'm sure she does as well. And I have to give my library some credit too, because they have a part of this giant Viking ship that just lives at my library in my little town, and that definitely just got me thinking so much about the longship and the sailing aspect, and really how important that is to Norwegian culture, and it's infiltrated every part of Norwegian culture today, and that includes sport.
Nice. So you said early in the book that Norway doesn't have much in the way of sports media, and there's this great anecdote about, you and Kristian are out running and you think he's going to get recognized. He's totally not recognized. Maybe the small degree of sports media is because of the Children in Sports Act that you talk about. How did everyday Norwegians kind of respond to you and what you were doing?
It's been cool, especially since the book has been out. I've done a couple of Norwegian podcasts now, and yeah, it seems like they were a lot of Norwegians are very turned off by the term Norwegian method or the concept. They certainly like the attention, but just the idea that it's I don't know. It's just this concept that's been put on them, and not something necessarily they're putting out into the world, if that makes sense. But yeah, I think the response for the most part has been quite good in Norway, and among those athletes. And it's interesting. Even in Norway, there's a lot of athletes who don't prescribe to a lot of these methods, and it doesn't work for them. And so maybe that's where part of the those who are against the Norwegian method concept comes from. But even those people who, some of the athletes and researchers I talked to who aren't proponents of quote unquote the Norwegian method, were supportive of the book as a whole, because it took a more holistic approach to what's going on in Norway, and not just. I think a lot of the people, when I was talking to them or interviewing them, they thought it was going to be very specific, science oriented, and not take that holistic view on what's going on in the culture. So yeah, I'm glad I tried to take that broader approach to what they're doing, and I hope it's been well received. And I was really stoked that a couple of people in Norway reached out and wanted to do a podcast, and that was kind of fun.
Yeah, I bet that feels like, okay, it's getting beyond this kind of bubble of like American triathlon.
Yeah, for sure.
We're moving into this like section of questions here where, we're going to talk about training and talk about the athletes and the coaches and stuff like that. But now that you've been steeped in this world for, several years, what do you tell people the Norwegian method is when they're like, hey man, you wrote the book, like you should know what this is. So like, what's your answer, based on everything you experienced? How do you describe this method?
A very long-term approach to building the largest engine possible with the best tools that science currently has, and with the understanding that science is constantly evolving, and it's not just part of the Norwegian method, but core to their method is that it's constantly improving, and there's a lot of trial and error involved, I think from a training standpoint, most people who probably listen to your podcast or who are familiar with me know that the core components, it's a relatively high volume and a relatively low intensity training approach with threshold sessions, ideally guided by lactate, and ideally done in a double threshold manner. And then there are smaller components that stack on top of that. If we're thinking of a pyramid, as we get closer to the top, you have the chapters that come later, which like altitude and heat training, which are just the sort of like the finishing touches on building this method. But yeah, at the bottom is a very long-term approach, a very healthy, stable, cultural, social structure, so that athletes are able to have the right approach from a very, very young age. And get to the top of that pyramid at when they're supposed to be peaking. And I think that's something that's really important, is that there's a focus in Norway of just building the best 25, or I'd say 22 to 30-year-old athletes possible. When athletes are at their prime is when they want their athletes to be at the prime. They're not interested in having the best 12-year-old cross-country skier in the world. They might, but it's not, they're not bending themselves over backwards to make a great 12-year-old, as a lot of countries, especially ours, is.
Yeah, could you talk a little bit about that Children in Sports Act? Because if we've got people listening that haven't read the book or don't know about that Norwegian approach, what is different about the way that Norway approaches youth sports?
Yeah, it's great. It was started in the 70s, and then I reformed sometime in the 90s. But I love just the way it starts, is that, children are children and not small adults, and should be treated in sport as such. And just a focus on play and non-competitiveness, and really strictly limiting how far athletes under, I believe it's for athletes under 16. So athletes 16 and under, how far they can travel for competition, how often they can compete, just guidelines for just keeping it fun. And most of the athletes I talk to, their upbringing is whatever sport they chose, whether it was cross-country skiing, skating, running, soccer. Their memories as a kid are just playing with their friends and making friends and being outside. It's not like this high performance, super structured system. Now they do have a ton of high performance, especially in cross country skiing, high performance skiing academies that, they're making these kids have fun, and yet they are trying to filter them down into, the best skiers in the world. And there are certainly ways to skirt the Child Rights in Sports Act, as I write about. Certainly, Jakob Ingebrigtsen, skirted every single rule that was in there, and Gustav's parents probably as well. He was performing cycling at a very high level at a very young age. So yeah, it's a country where you have freedom, but it's those guidelines are there to help mold the structure of sports, and it's hard to argue with the results that it seems to be working and building some pretty great athletes.
Can you tell me about a moment during this whole process when your prior assumptions about Norway and about the Norwegian method were challenged or upended?
Oh man, that's a good question. Yeah, I don't know. I think as I was interviewing like Olav a lot and Kristian a bit about some of the specifics of their training, and I think that there's such a maybe because most of what's been written, at least initially, about the method was from Marius, and he's been so open with his creation, and not creation, but the way he formulated his real version of the method, and so that's what people are familiar with. And I don't know, there seems to be this misunderstanding that they're doing like insanely high volume, and they're not. The intensity is so controlled that they're never doing these like these massacre sessions that put people in the infirmary. And I think that especially the more I got to know Kristian and talk to Olav is like they have a lot of infirmary sessions, and they'll let him go to some very dark places, and whatever you want to call it. Some people say go see God days, and those really hard training sessions. So yeah, control is there. Control is a huge component, the biggest component, intensity control. But it's not, it's not like those guys aren't going deeper on their hard days than others, and aren't letting themselves go. So yeah, there's whatever zone system you want to use, whether it's 3, 5, 8, they are going into the absolute highest reaches of their zones. And quite often, especially as they get closer to race day, and they need those intensities. So yeah, I think that the big what I learned is that the training it's not lower intensity. It's just very specific to their race intensity. And for someone like Kristian who's sprinting to win a medal, that is the absolute highest of high intensities and something that has to be trained for. So yeah, I think that just the understanding of the intensity distribution was something that I learned throughout the process.
Yeah, I was blown away by that moment when you're talking about Marius and like his journey is just wild. Like all the coach swapping and the traveling and the learning, and like what an amazing kind of self experiment of one. But there's this moment when you kind of walk through the numbers, and it's like he was doing around 45 miles of threshold training a week. And like to most of us, it's just like, oh my goodness, that is a substantial volume of threshold training. And like, that was a kind of like, oh wow, that's a big number.
And that's why, and that's probably where people's understanding of the method comes in, and why they're like, oh, there's no super high intensity stuff. Because for Marius, it was that controlled, and he really did keep himself from dipping into those, those upper reaches, which for him, he's training specifically, for the 5,000, and didn't see a need to be doing that, and because of that was able to do 45 miles a week, at roughly that intensity that he would need at the 5,000, which for me, who I top out around 45 miles a week, 50-mile a week is a huge week. Like I can't even begin to comprehend what that would do to the body. But with the right, very long-term approach, and enough trial and error, and that's what it took for, Marius had really beaten himself up with some great coaches as a youth, but had seen what too much high intensity can do. And, I would never say he overcorrected, because he was one of the greatest, European runners of all time. But a lot of people who are critical of, some specifics of his method say, there wasn't enough of that high intensity stuff, and maybe he really went too far to the side of intensity control, which, people who are critical of the method, that's something that they continue to bring up today.
Yeah, one of the things that really comes clear from your book is, because you keep doing this thing where you're like, there's Norwegian Method 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, maybe 4.0, that it's this it's this living document. It's kind of this iterative thing that is a lot of different coaches and athletes are sort of fiddling with and playing with and changing a little bit, and that it's not this monolithic approach. Like, would you say that that's accurate?
For sure, yeah, and that just so much of the Norwegian sports science is based in rowing. That's really where they and cross country skiing as well. But the rowers were where they really started studying a lot, and it just it's such a small country, and as I write about, the coaches are all so intermingled, and the way that Olympia Toppin works, it's just very easy to get access to other coaches and sports scientists, and that rowing science just sort of bled out to other sports, to running, and to then triathlon. Yeah, the Norwegian Method 1.0, 2.0 thing that came from Dr. Steven Seiler, who's a big part of the book, and you really can't talk about Norwegian sports science without him. Yeah, he really sees Norwegian 1.0 being the rowing sports science that was going on in the late 70s, early 80s, as they really came back to huge prominence in rowing. And then 2.0 is now more the response to Marius, and ultimately Garrett and Jakob taking his Marius's training approach and evolving it for running. So he sees that as the 2.0, and now what Olav and Kristian have been doing is probably the third iteration of it, and yeah, it'll be interesting to see where it goes from there.
You have this, I don't know if this was intentional or just one of these like structures that you kind of discovered as you were writing it, but you have these three main characters. You have Jakob Ingebrigtsen, Kristian Blummenfelt, Gustav Iten. Without coming out and saying it, like Ingebrigtsen feels incredibly outcome oriented.
Mm-hmm.
Blumenfeld feels maybe a little more outcome oriented than process oriented. And then you talk about Gustav and how process oriented he is. And of course, like these athletes, it's not a binary, it's not an on off switch. But in researching and writing this book, did it change the way that you think about motivation or about goals?
Yeah, it's cool to hear you label those three athletes. I'd never. I always think about Kristian and Gustav being so opposite and being results and process driven. But yeah, that way of tiering them, I think probably is spot on. Yeah, it's always interesting for me to talk to and study someone like a Blumenfeld who's so different than me. I have so much more in common with a Gustav who is just wants to go ride his bike in the mountains and make jokes and play, and I'm sure he is. He's obviously, their results are a huge focus, but that's not just not what he's thinking about when he gets out of bed. He would probably be getting up and riding his bike regardless if there was a big goal out there. Yeah, I don't know. It's almost for me like when I'm interviewing someone like Kristian, it's almost like confusing because like I don't understand that it's like a killer mindset, and I'm sure I didn't get the chance to know Jakob, and I'm sure that he's very much the same, where it is. He's got like just this kill list of this hit list of insane goals, and that's what's motivating him when he wakes up, is like boom, 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 boom. And yeah, I think it'd be interesting to talk to Kristian or Jakob or maybe Gustav at the tail end of their career and see how that shifts throughout the career, because I think that when you are so results oriented, maybe it works for a certain period of time, and obviously it's working very well for Jakob. It's been working great for Kristian, regardless of what you think about his last year. I think maybe as they get a little older, that sort of has to shift if they want to keep their motivation at a very high level. I just feel like I don't know. I'm not built that way, but just seeing the way that Kristian lives and operates, like at a certain point, like that drive has to run out. Like it just has to, wear the battery down. I would think. But yeah, then again, certain people are true outliers, and that's probably what turns me on so much about those two athletes, is that Kristian and Jakob specifically, is that they seem to have a chance to do something pretty extraordinary, within their respective sports. And I'm very glad that Kristian has decided to stick with triathlon and kind of see what he can do over the next 4 years, because it's I don't want to bring up I'm more respect in the world for Gwen Jorgensen than any other human in the world, but like me loving triathlon, like there's always gonna be a part of me that like, man, if she would have just dominated for those next 3 or 4 years, and what could have been, and it probably would have been a similar story with Kristian. So yeah, if anything, it's just interesting to see how the ebbs and flow of the motivation, and what turns them on, and yeah, very, very different people. And yeah, I like the way that you differentiated those three. Yeah, those three athletes. I think that is perfect for Jakob. Like, he's got his, what is it, 7 or 9 records that he wants to break, and like that is his. And it's such a long term goal too, just so cool. Like, it's results oriented, but it is like like, I have 10 years to knock off all these world records. Let's do it.
Wow.
Yeah, it's cool. Yeah.
So kind of continuing in that vein of these like 3 very different athletes, it sounds like you didn't get to spend a ton of time with Jakob, but based on your time with them or around them, and you're this outside perspective, how do you think that they get in their own way? Like, what are the ways that you saw them kind of making obstacles for themselves, like the way that, the rest of us do in our own, sort of amateurisms?
Yeah, if anything, maybe just a bit too much ambition on the race side, and that's more both all 3 of them. I mean, love racing a ton, and if you left it up to them, would be racing nonstop, and that's also part of the the magic of the method, is that you should be racing a lot, and those are kind of the reason they're able to maybe dial back some of those ultra high intensity days, is because if you're racing once a month, twice a month, maybe even more, you're obviously getting that in. Yeah, they're very much able to kind of treat racing as training, but I think that can also go to extremes, and especially for Kristian and Gustav, it's such a weird time for triathlon, as you know, and there's a lot of opportunity for a high-end professional, but there's also like hard decisions that have to be made. It's almost like you have to choose a route, which way you're going to go, and trying to do it all is just not possible. And I think you saw that with Kristian, really wanted to go after the PTO or the T100 tour, as well as the Olympic stuff, and kind of keep it. And for a while, it seemed like he was still going to do the 70.3. And at some point, you just have to realize that, you can't create more time for yourself, regardless of how great of a machine you've built. So yeah, maybe dialing back the racing a little bit, and just keeping those goals really specific. And I think that that's something that certainly Kristian is getting better at going forward. I'll be interested to see what he does. The focus is so hard on LA over the next 4 years, but where does he set his motivation, his small goals between now and LA to keep himself motivated and keep himself on that right path? And yeah, same for Jakob. Like, he's got world record goals. He's got, different distances he wants to choose between, but he's also, I think everyone says, be done with the 1500, but I don't think that that's something that he'll be done with anytime soon. I think that's a world record he wants and needs, and it's a gold medal that he really, really wants now. And yeah, it'll be interesting to see where their motivations go over the next 4 years, and if they can just sort of contain it to the point where they don't hurt themselves between now and Los Angeles.
Were you surprised by the announcement that Gustav and Kristian are parting ways with Olav?
The only reason I wasn't is just because I had talked to Olav like once a week for the summer, as we were finishing up this project. I probably spent more time talking to Olav than the rest of the people in the book combined. And yeah, he had kind of given me a heads up that they were going to be doing some restructuring, and he's got kids who are just a little older than mine, and has spent most of the last couple of years, away from them, and really needed to change that. So yeah, I sort of knew that was coming just from him, but the first time he had mentioned that'd be happening, I was certainly surprised, because you just think of the 3 of them as just a ball that goes together. Yeah, I think that they're all at the point that it's right and maybe best, and can kind of help them each reach a new level. And I don't think that Kristian and Gustav are at the point, as Jakob as well, who's now moved on from his father training him for other reasons. Right. But he's at the point where he can really train himself and rely on the people closest to him. And they really, really know what they're doing at this point. So yeah, as long as they have the right advisors in place, I'm not too concerned.
What are you taking away from this project? As like personally, as an athlete, as a parent, like what
Yeah.
are you? And this is your first book, like, and as an author, like, what are you? How how are you thinking about this project as you kind of reflect upon it now that it's out there?
Yeah, I joke with people I'm just constantly trying to raise my kids more Norwegian. I'm not Norwegian at all, but obviously very fond of Norway and Scandinavia, and just trying to instill, yeah, just a love for the outdoors, and just yeah, waking up and getting outside, and yeah, I don't know, I'm just been hiking a lot more with them, been getting out, and we're hopefully going to get them on, at least my daughter, who's old enough, get her on skis this winter if we ever get snow again.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, just trying to yeah, think about the athletes I talked to and sort of what their childhood was like, and sort of and I'm sure they told me mostly, like, the glamorous stuff and the great things, but uh, yeah, just I want them to have a very happy outdoors oriented lifestyle, and I love that when I pick my daughter up from school on the bike and it's like 40 degrees and freezing, and every other parent's looking at me like I'm a lunatic. I'm like, this would be so normal in Scandinavia, and you guys would be the lunatics, and I'm totally fine with that. So yeah, that's definitely one aspect, and the other thing, like, for personally for my training, is just being more conscious. Like, I've been so non-scientific with my training over the last 10 or more years, and on purpose. I want to enjoy the training that I'm doing, and not make it seem like such a chore. But I've also obviously been selling myself short, and not training as well as I should have been, and then that bleeds over to other things, into nutrition, and to start to want. I wanted to structure my training better, so I could start to motivate myself to do other things better. And yeah, just I've gotten very pay much more attention to the intensity control aspect. I'll never use lactate like daily or even weekly, but like monthly, I love messing around with it and kind of seeing. It's a great way to tell myself that I'm going in the right direction, and yeah, just keep sort of setting those markers to make sure that I'm going like this. I turned 40 later this year, so I'd like to keep it, the fitness going up and up, because yeah, it's very easy for it to go down at this age.
Oh yeah, yeah. It gets harder and harder to keep what you have. Has
Yeah.
been my experience. Okay, so you and I know lots of triathletes. We know that sometimes they lose sight of the forest for the trees. What do you hope this book, like, what effect do you hope that this book has on the triathlon culture?
Yeah, I think that if someone reads it and yeah, like you said, we know a ton of triathletes, and most of them I know, they start out a season, probably did this a month or two ago, but they have their season plan, their races. It's very structured, and like, I've got to attack these goals, now, and it's obviously important to have that, and be super motivated. But yeah, just would like people to realize that if you're not a professional athlete, that all you really have is time. I'm sure, regardless of what you want to qualify for, this or that, your goal should really be to get fitter and faster, and ultimately probably healthier over the longest possible time frame, and for most of us that time frame is the rest of your life. So to approach it that way, and really just yeah, sort of, if that means dialing back the intensity and being a little more controlled, so that you can just keep climbing up the mountain, and avoid those plateaus. That's kind of what I'd like people to take away, and really see that that's the approach that has worked so well for these athletes, is that they're not plateauing. Have taken this very, very long-term approach to get into the top of the mountain, and haven't had many stops along the way. So yeah, and it's even better for us who have yeah, like I'd really love to qualify for Otillo this year, but if my fitness isn't there and then, we can't go race, like I could do it next year. I could do it 2 years from now. Like it actually doesn't have a huge effect on my life. And you shouldn't let it either. If you know that if you really, really want to get to Kona or Nice this year and for whatever reason it has to be put off, it's not part of your identity and shouldn't affect you. Just stay on the horse and keep going on the up and up.
During this process, like what can you tell me a story of a moment when you were just kind of like your mind was blown by either a workout that you were witnessing happening or maybe like the report of a workout afterwards? Like, was there any particular moment where you were just like, oh my gosh, this is happening at a wildly different level than I imagined?
Honestly, I think talking to Ingrid Christensen about her training back in the day, and I asked her, I was like, can you just send me what was your training plan like?
Mm-hmm.
And she sent me like a rough outline. I'm like, you were running 13 times a week, every single week, and she was doing that for so long, and like that was just it. She did a single run on Sunday because it was a long day, so she didn't double. And if there was a race on a Saturday, there would only be a single. But for the most part, it was 2 runs every single day, aside from Sunday when there's the one long run. And that had come. That's a skiing. She had adopted that from skiing, where you're just getting out for roughly 12 to 13 sessions a week. They're roughly around an hour. Some a little shorter and harder. Some a little longer and easier. But yeah, just to see me coming from a swimming background, like it should make sense because I'm like when I was growing up, I could have done 13 swim sessions a week, and I'm sure there were weeks where we came close. But I'm just like I'm not a runner, and I'm like, man, like getting to 5 times a week is like, my limit. And I would love to be able to get to 6, but like 13 times a week. And that's pretty similar to what Jakob's doing as well. He might be a little less. But yeah, the frequency at which some of the best Norwegian runners are running is crazy and key to this success. If you want to be a great runner, you better be running often. I think that there's a big, I don't know, I come from a swimming approach, so I'm like doubling is so important, and obviously running is so much different. But like I've always looked at runners as why aren't you running twice a day? And I don't. Obviously, the injury aspects are huge, but I think that you're starting to see that shift a little bit, and runners realize that if they do really, really control that intensity enough, that they can really bring up the frequency at which they're running. And that can it should lead to more volume and ultimately more successes at the end of the day.
Yeah. Yeah. I thought it was wild that both her and Marius sort of brought up this, like, yeah, we run a lot and we run with high frequency, but both of them were like, no, I don't run faster than race pace. And I was just like, oh, wow, what an interesting, so different, from what we would kind of do as an approach now.
Yeah. Yeah. And they would get in their race pace on race days. And it was interesting, 2 totally different ways of controlling for that too. Whereas like Ingrid would just go out and run in the woods and she never wore a watch. She got a heart rate monitor really late in her career because it didn't exist early on. And whereas Marius wanted every tool in the world to make sure that he was not, dipping over that threshold that he had set. 2 totally different approaches to ultimately something that's really the same.
Have you read Niels van der Poel's How to Skate a 10K? Have you experienced that? Yeah, I was like, oh, I got to ask Brad about that. Like, could you, if it's possible, like it might not even be, but could you compare and contrast the Dutch approach and the Norwegian method, if there is any contrast?
Yeah, I guess the similarity would be that there's a lot of, if you compare it to like Marius's method, there's a lot of very specific threshold, like right at racing, like very, very high volume at that threshold. The difference is I actually probably way more in the Dutch approach and leaving out a lot of the lower end stuff, and then insane amounts of rest, which is someone who I spent a bit of time in powerlifting and bodybuilding, and that makes incredible sense to me that if you are doing that, it's almost like the Dutch approach is more of like a powerlifting weight training approach of massive overload combined with massive rest. I think that I certainly wouldn't try to copy that approach
God.
of how to race it.
Yeah.
Nils is, yeah, he's a very specific, amazing
Hmm.
human, and yeah, just an awesome, and probably a bit like Marius in that he loves being a study of one, and learning about his own body, and yeah, I think that there's absolute uh, yeah, there's genius to both approaches, and they both work for a certain type of athlete, and definitely wouldn't work for another. But yeah, I would be very, very cautious of anyone trying to replicate Nils's speed skating approach to other endurance events. But there's yeah, a lot to be taken away that yeah, that you do need a lot of threshold intensity, and it's figuring out the way that your body can handle that is one of the most important things that I think every endurance athlete can learn.
Yeah, I mean that's sort of like that kind of boils down the book and like everything we're talking about is like, the at its core the Norwegian method is basically like don't do too much.
Mhm.
It's kind of what it feels like. Does that feel
Yeah,
accurate to you?
yeah, and don't be afraid to, yeah, that one less, it might be better than one more, which is like the flip of, we've I remember some company, some gym brand when I was like in college, like their slogan was one more rep, and all these
Yeah.
dudes had like a shirt on that said like one more rep, like you can always do more. And it's a very like that's a great sort of meathead approach, but over a longer term, when you're trying to put in as much training as possible, as much stimulus, which is the way that Olaf loves to look at it. Is not he, everyone wants to talk about volume versus intensity, and he likes to just do away with both of those and think of how do I get in the most stimulus, and that's ultimately what the balance is how do you work those two to get the most stimulus. So yeah, I think that that's ultimately yeah, it's a approach to get in the most effective stimulus possible for endurance training, and then learning how that works for you. And it might be, it's, as I write about quite a bit, it's vastly different between athletes, and even a Kristian and Gustav who are training for something very much the same event have to approach it somewhat differently.
Right at the end of chapter 10, you talk about the fact that like living like the Norwegian way is a real crucial component of a lot of these athletes' success. If you were going to try to incorporate some aspect of Norwegian life for athletes that don't live that life, how would you do that?
Uh, whew, um, that's a good question. Uh, yeah, I would. Um, I don't know, the best that, like, and so many people are already doing this, but yeah, get outside early. Yeah, and that's just setting the tone for the day that way. That is something that, like, I don't know, maybe a lot of Americans or Westerners have to be like reminded to do, and it seems that in Norway that's something that is just sort of part and parcel of the culture. Is you get up and you get outside, and um, yeah, that's definitely. Yeah, don't stop moving.
Nice.
It's the stopping that gets people, and where you get injured. But yeah, if you do it smart enough, then you can keep moving throughout the day, and throughout your life pretty well, and yeah, be a bit healthier, a bit more Norwegian.
What are the other stories that you're excited about telling? Now that you've got this book, you've been working in journalism and writing for your whole career. Like, what are the other things that are on your kill list? Like, what are the stories that you're like, oh man, I got to go do that?
Yeah, there's on the science, sports science standpoint, I think researching this book has got me really thinking more about heat and altitude science, specifically the heat, because I think that that's maybe a bit behind of altitude. It's probably where altitude was 20 or 30 years ago. So yeah, I've got a project in mind that's very heat focused, and would like to explore that. Yeah, and then from the athlete standpoint, I'd love to get to know Jakob a bit more, and I hope this opens up some doors going forward the next 4 years. That's someone who I'd love to write quite a bit more about. Just of all the athletes on the planet right now, just more fascinated with where his career goes, and what he's trying to do for running. And Yeah, so I'd love the opportunity just to cover his career a bit more. Would be pretty cool.
Nice. For my last question, I'm going to turn one of your questions around on you.
Uh-oh.
If you weren't doing this, what would you be doing?
Oh man, that's my favorite question. I should
It's a
know that
great
too.
question. It's such a good question.
Yeah, it's like such a nerdy. Like I feel like I'm gonna sound like a 5-year-old kid. But like I love ocean science. I love the waters is a huge part of my life. I spend as much of my life as I can in water. So I'd love to. Hopefully, I would be uh, back living in San Diego where I used to live, and like researching sharks at the Scripps Institute would be like one of the other things that I could totally see and that I could just fixate on. So yeah, hopefully something in the sea, research in the ocean. If I wasn't writing about all these crazy people.
All right. Well, then that's why the first two chapters of your book are about
There
boats. Now I
there you
got
go.
it.
Yeah,
Now I
yeah.
understand.
It's constant. Yeah, I'm constantly thinking about water or the ocean or yeah.
Well, where can people find out more about you and where can they find the book?
Easiest place for the book is on Amazon. It's if you like doing the old school, going to a bookstore, which is awesome. It's also a Barnes and Noble, some Targets, but yeah, don't count on that. So yeah, Amazon's easiest and best place to follow me is on Twitter or X or whatever we're calling it these days, at BB Culp. And then I'm also on Instagram, but that's mainly just pictures of my kids and fishing and stuff. But it's Colt BB over there if anyone wants to follow.
Well, this has been awesome, man. Thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate you coming on and chatting with me for an hour about all things Norway.
Yeah, appreciate you having me on. It was an honor, and yeah, great to catch up after so many years.
I know it's been a while. All right. Thanks a lot, Brad. Thanks for being here.
All right, thanks, Chris.